President Trump's foreign policy raising a lot of eyebrows and also questions. He, of course, ordered the bombing of Syria, even though he had previously urged President Obama not to attack them. Then he softened his stance on China after meeting with the Chinese president, as we discussed. And after years spent blasting them over trade and currency policies, he seemingly has had a change of heart. They're also getting interesting in Europe. France's election is Sunday, and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, she is looking like she's heading for a runoff with either a far-left candidate who's gaining traction or an independent centrist. Whoever wins will have a lot of sway for the future of Europe. Then, of course, there is North Korea, as we discussed. All day yesterday, it was saying a thermonuclear war could break out any minute, so things more than a bit tense on the Korean peninsula. And remember last week when tensions started flaring up over there and the White House said that our American carrier group was steaming to the region as a show of force? As you mentioned last segment, it turns out the Carl Vinson and 4 of the ships were heading the opposite direction to take part in exercises more than 3,000 miles away. White House blaming the Pentagon for the mix-up. Pentagon saying the White House announced this prematurely. Everyone pointing fingers. It's hard to know at this point who to believe. And here to help us sort it all out, the Washington Post senior political reporter, Aaron Blake. When you look to what happened with the Carl Vinson and the armada that was supposedly heading to North Korea, do you just look at it as Keystone Cops, or the fact that only because there was a photo that somebody took on Monday did people start piecing together, and nobody from the Pentagon or the White House even told us? What troubles you more?
Yeah, it's a very strange set of circumstances here. We at the Washington Post spoke to some experts who suggested there is some benefit to maybe throwing some misdirection the way of North Korea to make them think that something is happening that maybe isn't. That could be a potential explanation for this. But I think if you look at the track record of the White House in dealing with things like that, oftentimes it seems like they're the gang who can't shoot straight. They have one version of events coming out of the White House and another version coming out of the State Department. Sometimes their version of events is pretty easily contradicted by actual events on the ground, and they don't correct the record for a number of days. This is certainly in that category right now. This has now been more than a week since this move was first announced by the U.S. Pacific Command, and we're just finding out today that, in fact, this the Carl Vinson was not headed towards North Korea. In fact, it still didn't seem to be on its way there as of a few days ago. So we'll see. Now it appears to be on the way, according to Defense Department officials, but certainly a bunch of very contradictory words from the administration, which make it much more difficult to believe them when they assert things are happening going forward.
Tell everybody at home, if they aren't paying attention, why they should, to what happens this weekend in France, and also the decision by the British PM, surprising many as to the timing, calling for an election.
Yeah, I think it's an extension of the debate that began with Brexit. How much does this kind of nationalism that we saw in that vote, and also in the vote for President Trump in November, how much does that translate to other countries in the Western world? I don't think that any two situations are completely analogous, but if you look at nationalist candidates, and certainly Theresa May has affixed her brand to this right now, to the Brexit rather, I think you're going to see more and more votes on this nationalist kind of approach to things, and whether or not this is going to be something that politicians in the Western world are going to continue to push forward on.
Go to Asia, and if you could, do you think folks in South Korea, beyond being on edge, are looking at the U.S.'s talk, and you can debate if there's a strategy or not there? Are they feeling comfortable? What's the takeaway from the Chinese? Because, you know, they were currency manipulator. One day there's a meeting and they're no longer called that as well. How are they assessing what's coming out of the Oval Office, and how much the U.S. does or doesn't want to basically be a player in Asia?
Yeah, I think right now the picture that's being put forward by the Trump administration is one of a kind of unpredictable player in that region. Certainly Trump has been up and down with the Chinese, the currency manipulator thing you talked about, talking to the leader of Taiwan a few months back was a provocative thing for him to do. Certainly seems to have ironed things out with the Chinese president. And then with regards to North Korea, you know, we've gotten a number of conflicting signals. There was a report about a potential preemptive strike against North Korea if they were going to test a nuclear bomb. The Trump administration disputed that. Now we have the Carl Vinson situation. So I think that if there is one thing that has kind of united Trump's foreign policy and his rhetoric about these things from the campaign trail until today, it's that he does want to be viewed as somebody who is unpredictable. He doesn't want people to know what to expect from him. And so I think a lot of these moves are calculated to make people really not know what's going to be coming from a Trump administration, not really make him a predictable foreign policy player.
You know, you would think that after the bombings in both Afghanistan and Syria, that there would have been a bump in the polls, and if anything, it went the other direction. And I'm curious, I could have seen the White House taking a read to say, oh, muscular action equals good press after so many bad days in the news cycle. But do they look at the numbers and say, wait a minute, we didn't get the bump we wanted? How much do they look at it, since often they're transactional? I know you wrote a recent piece about their impulsive problem that they have as well, or at least the president does. Take a look at the last week and how you think it may or may not apply going forward to how they look at the world, and more importantly, how they're going to react.
You know, I think there was maybe a very, very small bump, small and temporary bump, rather, on the heels of the strikes in Syria. Those strikes were approved by a majority of people, according to a number of polls. But if you look deeper into the polls, they did not do anything to help Trump shake what was his biggest vulnerability as a candidate, and that was that people didn't think he had the temperament to be president, that they thought he was too impulsive. This was upwards of 2/3 of Americans, even many people who voted for Trump, believe this to be the case. If you look at polls now, that belief is very much intact. I think the more that Trump pushes towards potential military involvement, either further in Syria or elsewhere in a country like North Korea, that's going to give people real pause, because there is this very persistent skepticism about his ability to handle those kinds of situations, about his ability to make those decisions. So I think he's going to be picking and choosing what he's going to do from here on out, but I think he'd be well served to be careful about how far he pushes it as far as using military force.
Aaron Blake from the Washington Post, thank you so much. All right, coming up next, numbers, as we just touched on, well, they tell the story. And when you look at the latest poll numbers about President Trump, it tells a very telling one. Be right back with that after this.